Kia ora, welcome back for the afternoon session on a topic that's very close to my own heart. We're going to be talking about AI in education. And I have this stellar panel here from AUT who are going to talk about their particular take on AI with a little bit of reference to ChatGPT. We can't go too far away today away from thinking about generative AI and what it's doing to the education space, but our workspace, our industries, and where we're heading into the future. But let me start by doing a little bit of an introduction. We're a little bit out of order here to my notes, so we'll start here with you, Damon. So Damon Zalessa is the Vice-Chancellor. Can I call you a new Vice-Chancellor? How long?
1 year. Over
1 year,
yeah,
you're still new Vice-Chancellor here at Auckland University of Technology. He is an interdisciplinary scholar who works in Oceania, especially around history, politics and culture. Damon is also a prize-winning author who specialises in interdisciplinary study of the Pacific and has published on race, politics, history and society. So lots of great things to bring into this conversation about artificial intelligence. Masa, I'll go to you. And Masa I've known for many years. We've worked together extensively and certainly a great expert in this field. Masa officially is the Senior Lecturer of the School of Engineering, Computer and Mathematical Sciences, as well as a Director of Women in Tech for the Faculty of Creative Technologies, plus a number of other things around C# and a whole bunch of work that you do know in your so-called downtime. Then we'll go to Rupak Sinha, and Rupak is the Associate Professor and Director of the Software Engineering Research Centre here at AUT, and is also the Associate Head of School Learning, Teaching at AUT's School of Engineering, Computer, Mathematical Sciences. These names have got to get shorter. Yeah. But you're really focused on research. I can see there's a number of outputs there. You've been working here, also in France. And I have to say all of this here. You've got your primary research interest in systematic, standards-first design and next-generation cyber-physical systems and software applied in domains like the Internet of Things, edge computing, cyber-physical systems, home industrial automation, and intelligent transportation systems. I got there. It's not straightforward. And then last but not least, Craig Wattham, who is here as a learning advisor and with a learning success focus here with an AUT. And you're at the library, which I might have to talk to you about libraries in this day and age and how that fits in. I'm sure that's a really interesting topic in its own right. But I note here you're a firm believer in transformational power of education. I have to say, a huge believer in it too. I continue to think it's the only way forward. Particularly we're in this time of great change. So I will actually pass along the baton across maybe in the order that you're seated, just to maybe do a quick intro to your take on AI and how you see it sort of coming out into the world of education and what clear messages you'd like to get across to this group who are viewing today. Masa.
Sure, you start with me. Artificial intelligence is a very close topic to my heart because I did my PhD 2008 in artificial intelligence, specifically natural language processing. And now what I've done is totally obsolete. So it is very fascinating to see how it's changing. And I'm a mom of a 6-year-old, so I'm really curious to see how AI can change the shape of education as we know it now. And I've done a lot of research in the area of that, how AI can potentially impact or change the education, which I will tell you a little bit more about it later.
Amazing. Thank you. Damon.
Oh, well, it's such an exciting time to be thinking about AI. And I see that excitement both as a leader of an educational institution, but also as a teacher and as a researcher. And I think we know that education is about facing into the future. Technology, often its first frontier is within learning and education. So we have that excitement, but then we also know there's something very significant about this moment. The way that we use, apply, and respond to AI will define the difference it makes in our world, whether that is a positive difference that includes, perhaps lessening some of the inequalities education has traditionally faced, or whether a different kind of outcome happens. So it's a really important moment for us.
Yeah, I think we're all thinking about the democratisation of education and how AI may fit into that. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation a little bit more. Keep passing the baton down.
Yes, thanks. As one of the largest STEM schools in the country, we have an opportunity to really address this disruption in a leading manner. We have a lot of capability, including masters around AI, and we do develop models for AI. And we also have thousands of students who do our programs. So connecting those dots identifying the new capabilities that students will need to be productive in the new work environment after this disruption is the job we are looking at doing well, and really excited to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Craig?
I agree with everything everyone said. I think the point that I'd want to raise primarily is that we're at a state of trying to understand how students are incorporating this into their own learning behaviours, not in the sense of academic integrity or the risk that there might be to security for assessments, but literally as productivity tools, as things that can actually bring value to them. I think they're also trying to understand the limits of some of the tools as well, which is possibly the same as us. So yeah, I basically deal with the students daily, and there's a sense where they're in exactly the same state as us. They're trying to understand it, trying to navigate it ethically often and things, and so that's my take on it as such.
And so maybe we'll just start with the question around that. I mean, your role is in the library. Now, of course, some people have a very modern view of a library, and some will have a very contextual, like where they last went to a library. How do you see those tools becoming part of research, and actually when people are starting to discover, doing a literature review, they're trying to find new kind of content, new context. How does a library's role change where information is abundant?
Yeah, I mean, I think one way you can think about the library, all the amazing things that happen there, there's a continuum between perhaps information literacy and academic literacy. And so, for example, I'm not a librarian, although I'm in the library, and my skill is, in fact, the reading and the writing and the communication of your learning in the sense of assessments, but other sort of academic forms. And if I wasn't paying attention to AI tools, bringing this wonderful sort of dynamism and constant flux now to what it means to write and things. I mean, we're in a state where I think hybrid writing, if it isn't already nearly the norm, it will become the norm. And I mean hybrid in the sense of robotic tools or AI tools and humans interacting to produce texts. And so from my perspective, as a person who helps students navigate that as a skill base, we have to talk about this, because there might be moments when we say, oh, that thing I used to do, in fact, is not really worth me doing anymore, because you are, in fact, getting the same type of support, or scaffold is the more positive educational term for it. But there are clearly things where I could still be chiming into that whole kind of learning process. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So
yeah.
that's the take, and it's very much about users in a sense. We're all users. We're not creators, for example, in the terms of some of my colleagues, but we are trying to navigate it. And there is a strong intent from students not to circumvent the rules or anything like that, but to understand what they could get out of these in the ordinary sense of automation, I think.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of conversation about, is this just going to rise the number of people who are plagiarising content? Is it going to be, what does it mean for artists, copywriters, people who are, literally physical artists, all the way through to, will people just cheat in exams? And I think in a way, it's unfortunate that so much of the rhetoric's been around that type of behaviours, instead of sort of talking about what does it really mean longer term, what are the implications, and how do we utilise it? And so actually, I wouldn't mind starting here with Martha. You talked about your PhD has almost become redundant, which is, it wasn't that long ago, and it shows how quickly technology gets superseded by another. If you think about generative AI, and it is really based about rhetoric, and it's not about logic, it doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't look back and think about where's the information coming from. What do you think the limitations are that people need to know, particularly as students or people who are relying on generative AI? What are the limitations that they need to be sort of saying, okay, it's good for this, but perhaps not for this?
Really good point. So the very first thing, I have to put my hat as a lecturer teaching, AI, artificial intelligence. So let me tell you a little bit about the core of these generative AI. So the core of this generative AI, or ChatGPT, which is a chat-based, generative pre-trained transformer. So they're all working based on these large language models. And what are these large language models? So they are a core, or one of the artificial intelligence tool that they're working on a massive amount of data. And these data, they're all in the format of the text, which has gathered online through the text, or even every single one of they're contributing to that large language model. So first of all, it is text-based. The second thing is really important to know about them. All of these systems at the moment, at least when we're talking about the ChatGPT, and they're based on a GPT-4 model, they are all trained based on a data which is valid till end of 2021. So they are not very up to date in terms of the information they're providing. The second important thing is that we need to know about the limitation of these type of tools, because they're working on a large amount of data, text data, we need to assess and measure the quality of the data. So you heard a lot of terms around, algorithmic bias, which that type of text might have a bias, and what it means that the type of result they can generate can be systematically or unfairly towards a specific group of people or type of data. So you can really rely 100% in the outcome coming from this machine, although they're trying to be human-like, but I think we all have to take them with a grain of salt. So you can, I personally love technology, but I can't trust them. I use them as a support decision-making system, not a decision-making system, because they can have some serious, if they use in a wrong way for decision making, like social justice, hiring, lending, they can have a huge impact in people's life. And I think these are some of the limitations that we have to be mindful when we're using generative AI tools.
Yeah, look, I think that warning is, really one we need to make very clear to people that there's, it has what they talk about hallucinating, hallucinates ideas and concepts and will create models of a vacuum cleaner suddenly has features it doesn't even have, and it does really sort of some crazy things. On the other hand, obviously the speed to knowledge is going to be shortened, because if you can do your research much faster by using it as the sort of the prompts for other information, you can now into ChatGPT 4 put 25,000 words as a prompt. It's a novel in that in itself. So obviously over time the amount of information is going to increase. And your point about it's only up to the end of 2021 is really valid as well. But what if the next one, we've got, Google Bard is out, we've now got, Microsoft with Bing and its Copilot going across all their suite of different products. What if people take it up to today? And I think I might pass this over to you, Damon. If you think about an AI that's generative, that's up to date, which means it's no blanks. You're going right up to now, so you know where people are. You know where anything that's happening right now, how does that change history?
Well, it actually changes history quite. Part of the challenge there is the verisimilitude of the technology. So many people using it will experience an almost human-like experience. So even if there's an error, that sort of familiarity that makes it sort of us anthropomorphize the technology is really part of its power, but also part of its risk. And that's sort of maximised through talking about history. So the ability of ChatGPT to do some analytical functions far faster than ordinary people, to write at a volume that is faster, while also not making clear what it means to be an author anymore. So there's a challenge to that point of authorship, which sits at the heart of truth and of our idea about what is factual, because we associate particularly truth and history with the authority of a particular person and a fact. But as data is sort of aggregated, as it's run through an algorithm, we lose a sense of who actually wrote it. We lose a sense of who's responsible for it. And these are questions we're going to have to work out. And they're a real challenge to, I think, that the place we see people associated with the sense of truth. And that's part of what's interesting here. What is really also powerful about it is the kind of patience that comes with it. That, for instance, many students, when they engage with a model, find more patience in an AI than they would in a teacher. Explain it to me again, explain it to me differently. So it's iterative, it is patient, it seems to serve the user, and then it can generate history after history. And when you put that against what we've called hallucinating, which is kind of an out, right? It's actually just inaccurate, or it's kind of a bit wild, it's untrustworthy, as Maisa said. And we're going to have to be very alert, because alongside all of those challenges, we have this impression of it being very human. We have an impression that it is, that we understand it intuitively, when it is not intuitive and it's not a person. And it's actually pushing against our own notions of what constitutes an intelligence. So, everything from that sense of intelligence to the sense of authorship is really being delivered to us in new ways to interrogate. And these are kind of classic questions of academic enterprise. I mean, they're not new in a sense, but they're kind of happening at a speed, like you said, that we're unaccustomed to.
And I think if you look at your work and your understanding of Oceania and the Pacific and history, these are great cultures of oratory history and telling the story over, hundreds of years and thousands of years. And, when we start thinking now about how that story may change, do you have a view about will stories of the past be adapted and actually become new, almost urban legends, potentially because they become reinforced by an algorithm?
I think we have to be open to the possibilities of the technology and how they might serve, and how they might serve previously underserved communities. They might be able to access the ability to tell stories more fairly, more quickly, to even the kind of political economy of storytelling that has often skewed against small cultures and small societies. So I'm an optimist around that, and I'm also an optimist because in the Pacific we've seen perhaps the fastest transition through radical technologies that anywhere in the world. So the Pacific became literate in some parts, like Samoa, for instance, became essentially the most literate society on Earth within about 20 years of a printed language. So you can see this responsiveness that small communities can have, especially if they recognise the potential of them. But a key to it is actually understanding the technology, having access to it, making sure that they're not disengaged from the kind of circumstances of production and the technology, understanding the technology itself.
Yeah, fantastic. Rupeka, just a question around the lack of guardrails. And what do you think in terms of, there's no one organisation, there isn't, within Aotearoa, there's no context where we're sort of sitting there going, how do we decide what we think is ethical? How do we think about this going forward? How do you imagine, with no guardrails in place, that this could evolve in the space of education and industry?
Yeah, I think of this in 4 levels, really, and that's what we are doing in our school. The first level is really to have an open discussion, to create awareness, talking about what these large language models are. And in fact, we are starting new courses to help students ethically engage with these tools. Really, the goal there is to create a high trust environment between students and staff so that they can work together. The second one is to bring these tools into the classroom very openly, using them to supplement learning where possible. And we are already seeing, as Damon said, a lot of those mechanical tasks being automated, which is great. The third level really is to really rethink what we are teaching. What are the new capabilities that graduates need to succeed in a world armed with generative AI? So we're really kind of looking at active learning, to really flipping the classroom, to focusing on the students' capabilities and not so much on marking an essay. And finally, the most important thing really is to work with industry, to understand what they need in our graduates, working really, closely with those stakeholders to bring in the changes that we foresee will happen in the next 3 to 5 years. And so the guardrails not being there could be seen in a very optimistic way, and to actually really redesign what our future is going to be. And I think we are very well, in a great position to be able to do that by working closely with our stakeholders.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, and look, I think as an institute, there has obviously many feeder schools coming into it, and schools are taking their own stand on this. You're hearing those who are banning any form of generative AI, those who are embracing. Some are changing their assessment structures so that it's assessed on different ways. If in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I wouldn't mind from each of you saying, what would your advice be to a school, a decision maker, a board of trustees thinking about what should they be thinking as they're preparing their students for coming into tertiary, so that they don't come in with a sort of like a big gap of knowledge that they've, so just any advice that you may have for those who are really having quite a quandary over what to do at this point in time.
And what a quandary it is. I think what Rupeka has really pointed at is that we have to step away from this kind of arms race where they're using ChatGPT, we're using another tool to detect it, and actually drive to the heart of what learning should be at this point of time. And at the centre of that is a question around what learning means. We're trying to produce lifelong learners. As we've heard, Masa's PhD is already sort of in the rear view mirror. We have to make sure that learners can keep learning, and that means authentic learning experiences where students understand why they're doing something. Now, if they're doing an assessment which makes no sense to them, which they don't understand the benefit it delivers to them in terms of their own thinking and their own learning, of course they're going to think about ways they can circumvent it. But at AUT we particularly put a premium on embodied learning, on practice.
Great.
And those are not things that AI is really particularly helpful in subverting. So if you get the right kinds of assessment, if students themselves understand why they're learning, why they're pursuing a particular assessment, then we get both a better teaching practice and we get better learning outcomes. And we also know that AI is going to be here for good or for worse, but it's not going away.
True.
So, there's no imaginable future where we shouldn't be equipping students to know how to use it, to understand what it is, to think about it ethically, and how it would augment and support their own learning. And I think what I've heard is inspiring teaching that understands that.
Yeah, I must say that it's a great time to tell your students at school to just dive in. Forget about protecting content, focus on protecting the people, and let them explore.
Yeah.
Great advice. And look, I think we've just on time now, so I just really want to, first of all, thank you for bringing such a robust discussion in 20 minutes. I think we could have sat here for the next 2 hours and talked about it, but I do hope that some of the people watching, maybe parents, maybe teachers, maybe education leaders, are thinking about this much more holistically and not just taking a kind of a knee-jerk reaction, what looks going to be a threat on the horizon, and actually seeing it for some of the good things it can do, but being very mindful about some of the risks that come with that. So thank you for your time, ngā mihi nui, and I really do appreciate it. And thank you for hosting as well. This Tech Week TV, it wouldn't be here if it wasn't for AUT, so very grateful.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.